We're glad that we can do this and have it kind of co-ed, which is really fun. We don't get to do that very often. But one of the things we do traditionally with Presbyterian women is we have our opening prayer and lighting of the Christ candle. The Christ candle is already lit because I didn't want to run and light it between here and there. So I'm just going to do the prayer, and then I will introduce Melinda, and then I will get out of the way. The light of this candle reminds us of Christ's presence with us, and that Christ's light is never extinguished. God is the hope of the church and of the world. Let us pray. Steadfast and loving God, we thank you for the gift of being together today. We ask that you be with those who can't be here. Use us and guide us as we work for peace, hope, and justice in our world. In Jesus' name, amen. And our biggest praise, of course, is that Garrett and Melinda and Kensington and Langston will be staying for quite a bit longer. Yay! Okay, Melinda's there. Okay, we know her role as being a wife and mother, and we know she has other roles and other talents and experiences and stuff like that. That's why we invited her come to speak to us, because we don't always hear all these things. So I'm going to get out of the way and let her talk about her life.
Hello, everyone. Oh my gosh, it's kind of nerve-wracking to be at the pulpit. I definitely kind of envisioned us being over at Foxhall, sipping coffee and sitting around tables. And that was less intimidating sounding than this. Thank you guys for voting Garrett in. I think I'll start with that. Oh, we didn't plan for this to happen on the same day. And this probably would have gone really differently. It could have gone really differently, but it didn't. So thanks be to God. I think what I wanted to start with was getting a little bit more clarity about what you all are expecting today, like what you came here expecting to hear. Maybe I'll just say that. Did you come just like as kind of blind as I did, sort of like, what's Melinda going to say? Or did you have like a biography, or how did I meet Garrett, or when did I start being active in the church? Anything, or just start? Just start. Tell us about your job. Oh, that's good. Or I'll expand it. And surfing. Great. That's good. Those are good starting points. I'll expand it to career and interests. How about that? So let's see. Where to start? I currently work as a bereavement counselor for Dignity Hospice in Santa Maria, which is a fancy word for saying I'm a grief counselor. And I've worked for hospices throughout the United States for 16 or 17 years now. So a long time. This job that I've had since we moved down here as a grief counselor is a little different than the rest of my career. I've spent most of my time being a chaplain or a spiritual counselor, which kind of, I'm going back because I'd like to tell you a little bit about how I became any of these things and why I do them. I went to seminary at the same seminary where Garrett went, San Francisco Theological Seminary in Marin County. And I went there to learn, and like nothing else. I had just absolutely no goals beyond becoming educated more about Christianity and the Lord. I had not been raised Christian. I had not been raised with religion at all. And so I had, this is where I don't know where all the detail, how much detail to give, but as I look back at my life, even when I wasn't formally sort of familiar with God, I can see God's activity in my life. And I felt that all that sensing I was getting of God's activity in my life sort of, I don't know, nudging or encouraging me to learn more about or draw nearer to God. And after a lot of discerning, I found myself in seminary doing that. Something interesting about our seminary was that we have 3 academic years, and then we have a 4th year. Sorry, the microphone is my friend, right, Jim? Of internship. And almost everybody who was at our seminary was planning on working for the church. So finding internships was easy because they just looked for churches that would take interns and keep them busy for a year and got a lot of experience. I didn't want to do that. And it's no offense to the church. It just wasn't what I had any discerned as my direction at all. And I found myself in an internship for chaplaincy in San Francisco at a hospital. And kind of just by the process of elimination, it was kind of what was left as an option for my internship. And it was definitely one of the hardest years of my life. But it was the birth of my career for sure. It's when I haven't done anything much but work for spiritual caregiving since then. And let me stop. Could we be more interactive? If people want to like say, hey, tell us more about that. Okay, so I'm inviting that. How about that? Yeah, like we could talk. We could talk. I feel this is a little bit more businessy than I really intended, but my career and my life, I say vocation because I feel like my work that I've done that would be career oriented has just been really consistent with how I wanted to live my life. And I've been following it, and it's been evolving and changing over time. And it's been really compatible with my married life and family life because well, on a practical level, healthcare is everywhere, so I can always find work. And then I can be available to move as Garrett has needed to move. But really what's been so fun and challenging and really inspiring is that Garrett and I've both been, I don't know, called. We both feel, I don't like to put words in his mouth, but we both have a ministry that we feel like we've been called to do. And I kind of can never believe that it just sort of works out that we can be on one path and live into two calls that maybe have become even in its own sort of way, a third call together. But I love what I do now. I made a switch from spiritual caregiving to bereavement because in hospice, I've been working to help people die more peacefully and comfortably for 14 to 15 years. I did that. And I will always find that rewarding. But I started getting a nudge to work with people who were going to live on with after the work that we did together. And so that's where I kind of made a shift from working with sick people to working with grieving people, if that makes any sense. Questions? Sure. Great question. So because I work for a hospice agency, so all hospice agencies have bereavement available to, bereavement is a necessary part of a hospice program. So everybody who goes through hospice anywhere in the United States has access to 12 or 13 months of grief counseling afterward from people like me. And so most of my work is with people that have journeyed alongside someone who's passed away through our hospice program. Either right there as a caregiver, or even I have clients that aren't present but live in other places that are family members or relatives, anyone who's very stricken by the loss of someone, we can work with. That being said, I have a small part of my work where I work with community clients, people who just sort of call into our office and are looking for help and support. Usually it's grief related, and that can extend beyond the death of a loved one. It certainly can include that. But I had a client, a community client last year who lost her mom, and that was very significant to her. But at the same time, she lost her job and she lost her cat. And she said, I think any one of these things I could have coped with effectively on my own, but the trifecta was so big that she came through, and we can focus on loss of different types in that circumstance. Good question. Let's shift gears a little bit. Surfing. So it's not totally shifting gears. The work that I've done like for my career is pretty intense. I did take a step down in intensity going to grief counseling because in spiritual care, I'm in crisis people's crises most of the day. And now I'm not. But for 15 years I was, and I've had to learn how to sort of sustain that type of work, or not burn out, all the negative things that can come from being exposed to crisis. And so that's where my interests come into play. And surfing is a huge one. And I'm so grateful to be by the coast because I grew up surfing as a child, and it's really, really fun to be back, but I haven't been able to do it for, when you live in Sacramento or the middle of Georgia, you can't surf. So it's fun to have it here. When I didn't have surfing available to me, I was an avid runner forever. And then I'm a big yogi. A lot of people here know that already. I teach yoga and meditation and mindfulness, and I, even more so, I prefer to practice them. And all of those recreational activities and spiritual practices are like almost 20 years in the development of figuring out how to sort of replenish and sustain my energy and spiritual strength in the midst of like a really draining type of work environment, if that makes any sense. I don't right now, which is like so sad. It just has everything to do with the pandemic. When we moved here, everything was closed, and I was working for a yoga studio in Yuba City before we moved. And I continued to work for them until like just May, I think. I was teaching online and stuff like that for them. So my hours at the hospital just bumped up a bunch, and I kind of walked away from my online teaching of that. I am supposed to be able to be teaching yoga for grief through Dignity Health. But I've been saying that for 2 years. So I think we all still hope for that, but it's been a fickle time to try to get people together in a healthcare facility because there's lots of rules about that. So yeah, that's something that I've been asked about by others. So if there's interest, we can talk more about. There's all sorts of things that we could do here. Like yoga practice. Oh gosh, yeah. Well, so let's see. So many ways, it's hard to know where to start. I guess I have to say that. For one, it helps me ground and become focused. But for two, in grief counseling, I'm working so much with people who feel completely disoriented. Just life feels like it's been put in a blender. And I have the challenge of helping them sort of sift through all of that and find what's stable. And I would say that I practice that myself very intentionally through my yoga practice. And then it's so helpful for a lot of my clients. I help teach them practices of their own, things that are simple they can do, movement, breath work, meditation, mindfulness, and stuff like that. So those have been practices I have found that I have the most effectiveness with teaching others for healing themselves too. Those practices have brought me through all of the hard challenges of my life, everything from emotional to physical pain and loss, I would say. That's what yoga has done for me. Interest, yeah. I really love a good challenge, and I kind of thrive with some risk and danger involved. So that's where surfing comes into play. I was the youngest in my family, and my brothers, my older siblings are brothers. So I did a lot to try to keep up with them when I was a kid. So my stepdad built, it seemed huge at the time. I don't know if it was a 6 or 8 foot half pipe in our backyard. And when my teenage brothers were doing all sorts of skateboarding tricks on them, I would be like, I think there's a picture of me with a helmet and a cape and a bikini and roller skates, just dropping down on these things. So, I love board sports and wheels. So, skateboards and snowboards and surfing, I've loved forever, and they're very similar. So when you learn on one, it translates to another. But my other real big passion that I haven't mentioned is music. I wouldn't really consider myself a musician, but I dabble with playing some instruments, and music's just a really big part of my life. It's just one of the things that brings me the most joy. And I just love kind of all of it. And whenever I don't know what to do with myself, I just put music on. We used to have, do you remember this, sweetie? It's been a long time since I thought about this. Back in Georgia, our babies were young, but when we left, they were only 2 and 5. So they were just sort of 0 and coming up to those ages. And if you can remember having 2 babies at one time, and maybe some of you had like 3 or 4 or 5, and God bless you. But the mornings can be rough to get out of the house, to get 2 people to work and 2 babies out. And there were just some mornings when it felt like the wheels were coming off. And we would stop and we would put on Radio Gaga by Queen. And we would have a Radio Gaga kind of morning, and it literally changed everyone's mood. We would just get better and work it out. So music's been a good therapeutic part of our lives. Garrett and I met in seminary, and that's kind of when my life took a change from looking like my childhood and young life to more like the life I live now. Let's see, I was 26 when I started seminary. You were what, 22? When I started. Yeah. God, you were young. Yeah. Oh, because it was the year before. Yeah. So I was a stockbroker in New York for a brief while. More importantly, I didn't like that work, and I found yoga and became a yoga instructor in the midst of doing that in New York. But when I was there, I was kind of unhappy with where my career was going. I just wasn't inspired by it. And I had received somewhat of a spiritual call to be in service and ministry years before, and was starting to become more open to that. And one day I wrote a list of if I was going to do something like go to seminary. It was kind of the only idea I had of where to start. If I was going to go, I wrote kind of a list of what it needed to be like. You know, if there's a school that's just like this, then maybe I'll think about it. And I made this pretty ridiculous, very detailed list. And then I did a quick Google search, and I found a school called the San Francisco Theological Seminary, and it completely met all my crazy criteria and then far exceeded it. And I was on a plane to visit it like within a couple weeks. And I went there, and Garrett had been there for a year already. It's a really small school in Marin County. I don't know if anyone knows Marin County. Well, there's a little. Okay, so San Anselmo is right between sort of San Rafael, Fairfax, and Ross in Marin County. And I wish we thought and had a picture we could throw up of the seminary. It's on top of a hill. It's a white, beautiful set of castle-shaped buildings, and it's on Kensington Road. Which came first. So yeah, my mother-in-law gets all the credit for that. Actually, the first time I met my mother-in-law, who was not my mother-in-law at the time, but was the mother of the gentleman I was recently dating, actually planted that seed for naming our first child. That at the time it was a scary notion, but it worked out just fine. Nothing. So Garrett and I met in seminary, and he was there for a year before me, and it's a 4-year program. So when he graduated 3 years later, we got married, right? Basically the end of that summer. And we had the best wedding ever. If I don't mind saying so myself, because we were 2 seminary students getting married at our seminary. With all of our seminary peers, and then all of our church community and family too. And it was really, really fun. Garrett and I have lived an interesting life together. We moved a year after we got married to Georgia. And was that just today you were mentioning that neutral pulpit sermon in Alabama? Yeah. So Garrett and I don't think, I mean, I hate to speak for both of us, but I don't think we really knew how we would merge our life and live into the 2 separate calls into ministry we felt like we had, but I don't think we worried about it too much either. And that was a good example. So we ended up in Georgia, but before we ended up in Georgia, we were in Alabama for an interview at this church that Garrett was mentioning today in the sermon. And when we left that interview, we were completely convinced we would go to that job. And we got the job off. He got the job offer, and we were set to go. We were going to say, yes, we're going to accept it. We had, however, accepted another interview from this church in Georgia and decided to go through with it because they had made some arrangements for us that we felt like it would be rude to cancel. And when we went to Georgia, to this little town in Georgia, in Albany, we ruled it out right away. Would you say that's fair? We were like, there's no way we're coming here. We can't wait to get to Alabama. It's going to be great. And then 3 days later, at the end of that, we were on our plane on our way back to California, and we looked at each other and we just knew we had to go there. And that is a feeling that's hard for me to describe, other than just a very sure sense of knowing. And I would say that that was kind of the first time we had to make a decision like that, leaning so hard into the trust of the moment, because it wasn't a very practical decision that we made, but it was wonderful. Our experience there was really, really good, and it felt right. Not like there was maybe a wrong choice to make, but it felt like we lived into a decision that was really, really good for us. It was the birthplace of our children. So I'm from California too. I'm from Sacramento. I don't know if I mentioned that, but both of our children are from Georgia. This one had a little accent when he came to California, but I got beat out of you, I think, in kindergarten. Yep. So, questions? No questions? Do I ever think about moving back to Georgia? You know, it's funny. Now that the vote's over, I could probably say this. Garrett and I weren't really looking for a move when we came down here. And yet that's not totally true. I think we knew that a move was in store for us. But we hadn't really been making steps to make that happen. But one of the conversations we had was, yes, that Georgia was so lovely that we could probably live there again. But then Pat Ford called and changed all of those ideas and said a nicer place is the Central Coast. And so here we are. Yeah, I'll speak to this just because I have your undivided attention and it seems like the right platform, but wasn't it a crazy way for us to get here, for our church and us to come together? It seemed so unusually easy and peaceful and seamless at the beginning. Maybe all of you don't know everything because we were with the committee at the beginning with the interviewing stage, but all of it was so smooth. It was the easiest situation I'd been a part of when it came to a church. And we kept wondering, like, wow, this is all so nice and good feeling. And then, well, we all know what happened in March of 2020, like the whole bottom of the life fell out. And there was so no way to know what the future was going to hold. And it was actually the same day that California went into shelter in place that the job offer for this opportunity came through for Garrett, which was kind of like a radical shock to my nervous system. You know, it's like, oh my gosh, we're in a global crisis and a job offer came through. Like that just seems kind of like a weird thing to try to balance out. But we had already decided that this seemed like the right decision, and that didn't come into question. Really, it was more just a matter of logistics at some point. So we felt pretty good at being able to say, well, we don't know what the future holds, but the direction that we were being led before everything changed was to come here. So we decided to stay the course, and it's been a very interesting experience. It's been awesome, but we didn't even get to see you guys for like a year. Jim knows what it was like. Jim was my whole social life because we would sit over here with the dog and do each other's hair, just the family. And Jim was up there and we saw your faces. And so it's been really lovely. It's been an unusual time. And I'm so grateful for everyone's like patience with the process, because it's been a hard time to get to know people, and I look forward to having more opportunities to do so as time goes on.
The gentleman that sits with you here every Sunday is
My dad. Yes, yes. Sure. Yeah. So my dad is with us. He lives with us in Napomo. And before we moved here, he was living in Yuba City down the street from us. But before that, he was in Santa Barbara for 17 years. So he feels he's kind of back home because it's really close and more similar to what his life was like. I have an interesting birth order. It's I simultaneously hold the positions of being an only child, an oldest child, a youngest child, and a middle child, which is how I'm going to try to explain where my family is now. So I have my dad and my mom. They had me. I'm their only child. And my mom is in Sacramento. That's where I was born. And she and my dad divorced. And then when she remarried, I have two stepbrothers from my stepfather's side. But we've been family since I was 3. So they feel like brothers fully to me. And then my dad went on to have a few more children as well. And they're younger than I am. A brother. Okay, so my stepbrothers are, one is in Chicago. He works for United Airlines and he lives in Chicago, but he's never on the ground. We never know where he is. He's always somewhere interesting. And then my younger of those 2 brothers lives in Sacramento, and he has a family with my 2 oldest nieces, they're cousins. And so we go to Sacramento oftentimes to visit my mom and my stepdad and that family. And then my dad has a son, my half brother, who's a nurse. He lives in San Diego. He's currently living in Sacramento being a nurse, but he's moving back down there. And then he has a daughter who we're estranged from, which is just unfortunate. It was kind of way past my time, which isn't to say I'm not disappointed about it, but I was out of the house when all these things happened, and it was a messy divorce. So something I can't control and don't want to get into too much detail about, but so I was raised in Sacramento, and then sort of halftime in Santa Cruz, and that's where all the surfing started. And I feel like I'm a beach bum at heart. I definitely feel the most comfortable in my skin when I'm close to the ocean. And so being here has been excellent. And coming here in the middle of the pandemic was so revitalizing, because it was such a hard time to kind of stay motivated and stay positive. And coming here, I found it to be easier for the very simple reason of being by the ocean. Okay, next. Sure, good question. I had very little exposure to religion before I was out of like college, I would say. And certainly while I was in my parents' home until I was 18. I don't think I had much of it. I wasn't oriented. I didn't have the language. It all felt kind of mysterious and intriguing to me. My best friend growing up, Amy Brink, was her family's Catholic. And oftentimes I'd spend the night, we'd sort of swap who's not, our slumber parties. And when I was at her house on Saturday nights, I'd go to church with them in the morning. And I remember thinking it was really interesting and cool for when they make you like, they have good treats and like activities for kids. So that was always fun. But I remember the communion Sundays, and I had no idea what that was about, but I couldn't participate. And I thought that was interesting. I don't remember feeling left out. I just remember thinking, wow, there's something really special going on that I have no idea about. So I was pretty just unfamiliar with all of that, which is why when I went to seminary, I was really going for an education. I just felt like I didn't know anything. But I'll bridge the gap. So when I graduated, I went to UCLA for my undergraduate college experience, and upon graduation, I moved to London, and I was working for USA Today, the newspaper. They have an international headquarters in London, and I was there on a lunch break. And if you've been to London, I don't know if you've heard of the area that's called Trafalgar Square. and there's big lion statues in front. And there's one of the nicest museums in London. The National Gallery of London is right in Trafalgar Square. And it was close to where I work, so I would have lunch there a lot because I love the museum. And one time I had extra time and I was doing one of those guided tours you can take on a headset. And it was called The Life and Death of Christ. And it was just their like monthly one or whatever. I did them all the time. And I was taking this tour, and we got to a painting called The Baptism of Christ by Piero della Francesca. And I just had this really profound kind of, these things are hard to put into words, but nudge. I received a clear message, nothing that I heard, just something that I've known ever since, which was that I was to be in service to Christ. I was looking at this image, and I remember the headset saying this was a moment when Christ was taking measure in his life as he's being baptized. And I just remember being struck with a really big sense of purpose and responsibility, and having no idea what to make of that. And it took me a lot of years to respond to it. But that's where it started. I started reading the Bible then, and I started going to church I had a roommate who did that. So I kind of got invited in that way. And I just had something turning on inside of me that was like, it felt like needed to be. I don't even really know how to explain it, but like, a lot of maybe parts of me that had been searching for direction or meaning or purpose started to take kind of structure when I was when I was reading the Bible. I could just relate to it, and it was helping me understand life better. So it was basically with that curiosity and that particular kind of call into ministry. That's what my seminary people call it, a call into ministry. That's how I ended up going to seminary. And I really just went to get educated because I was finding so much healing coming through the studies I was just novicely doing on my own. I thought, well, if it's that good when I'm doing barely anything and don't know what I'm doing, then I should go to seminary and get submerged in it. And seminary was a super wonderful and powerful experience. If there's any time in my life I could go back to doing again, it would be that. It doesn't help that I met and fell in love and got married there. I'm sure that really, really like put a positive spin on it for me when there were also lots of challenges. But seminary was such a special time because everybody's there to grow in their faith very specifically. And that's a unique environment to be in. And when you weren't responsible for other people's faith, because that's what happens when you leave, being more responsible for their growth. But it was a really magical time, and it was very difficult, but it was difficult in all the right ways. I feel like it was very good preparation for what came next, all of life that came next, which is hard to like leave that big of a statement without explaining it, but it's just kind of that vast. It was really, 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 really deep work and really wonderful, positive relationships that were forged with so many colleagues, friends at the time, now colleagues. And it gave so much shape to like our life ever since. And we visit our old school all the time and have really, really strong relationships with people there. It was a very, very positive experience. One of my favorite of my life for sure. That was a great question. Thank you.
I don't want to stop the question. Anybody has a last minute question? Thank you so much.
I keep trying. It was at least an M word. Thank you so much. I just love hearing how God works in other people's lives. And I think that's one thing with Presbyterian Women, we have learned to see how God is working in each one of our lives and rejoice and be encouraged by it. We'll just close with the extinguishing of the Christ candle. I'll actually blow it out when I get out of this. But let's pray. As we extinguish this light, may its radiance abide within us, and may we become a beacon of Christ's love for others. Please join me now in the prayer taught to us by our Lord. I forgot that part was in there. Okay, we'll do it again. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Thank you so much for joining us. If you signed up for lunch, lunch is in Fox Hall. If you didn't sign up for lunch, lunch is still in Fox Hall, and you can still join us. I'm sure there's plenty of food. You can have my sandwich, it's fine. So thank you all for coming. We'll see you later. We'll see you over at Fox